how much fun this water slide is. Water slides are supposed to be a source of fun and careless entertainment, but when built by the wrong people, things can end in disaster quick. These are 10 banned water slides you can't ride anymore. And yeah, it's a very real metric that 88% of you watching aren't subscribed. Feel free to join the gang, but anyways, our first banned water slide is number 10, Cannonball Loop, Action Park, New Jersey. Long before the days of Jersey Shore on MTV, New Jersey had another major attraction in the form of an action park. Opened originally in 1978, the park was built for thrill seekers coming from New York and the surrounding areas. The park itself was riddled with safety concerns from day one, from poorly designed rides to general safety issues, which resulted in a number of injuries for a multitude of visitors. In fact, these rides were so lethal that over the years there have been 6 reported fatalities on the park's grounds. One of the most famous rides, the Cannonball Loop, was memorable for numerous bloody noses and back injuries. This led to the slide ultimately being closed and dismantled as well. Now, while you can't ride the Cannonball Loop any longer, the park is still technically in operation, but it's under the name Mountain Creek Water Park now. Number 9. Imagine it's 1998 and you're up late at night watching TV and you come across a commercial for the Rockahula Water Park. Now, the Rockahula itself was open to the public back in 1962 and was even given the moniker of America's first water park. Upon a later relaunch in 1998, the park wanted to show off aspects of a classic American culture. They included things like vintage cars, a general aesthetic which mimicked the 60s. Of course, it's a water park, and at the time, it had some of the best rides available in the world. After another extensive rebranding, the park name was changed to Discovery Park in 2002, but by this time, the park was on its last legs, especially with really poor attendance becoming more and more regular. Shortly after, an employee was injured on the job who ended up suing the park and effectively put the last nail in its coffin. Number 8. For this entry, we'll be looking at Vrucht, specifically the largest water slide in the world, which was given the German name after how terrifying the ride was intended to be. From its inception back in 2014, there were concerns from the public about the safety of the ride, leading to the opening being delayed not only once, but twice. The ride even had a weight limit of 400 pounds per raft, which is completely reasonable, but you'd think that this would actually be enforced really strictly. What I mean by that is that they would have to weigh riders to make sure nobody exceeded the weight limit so that all passengers would be safe. Unfortunately, that danger was way too real for a 10-year-old rider when he got in a raft with 2 women who had lied about their weight to the worker manning the ride. That negligence sadly proved fatal for the kid involved and led to extensive facial injuries for both the women as well. This incident single-handedly got the ride decommissioned and removed from the park for the clear lack of safety precautions for its passengers. It also really negatively affected public perception of the park as a whole, with the park being unsure about even opening this upcoming summer. Number 7. We're heading up north to Ottawa, Canada for our number 7 spot. Ottawa is home to Calypso, one of the world's largest and most popular water parks. This park has a 100-acre facility featuring 35 water slides, 2 lazy rivers, and over 100 water games. Yeah, place is massive. With a park having this many attractions, you can imagine how easy it would be for safety precautions to slip through the cracks, and that's exactly what happened. One slide in particular, the Steamer, was the most dangerous slide because of its lack of safety features. The slide allowed 2 guests to share a single inner tube with no harness to strap them in at all. It might not sound too bad from the outside looking in, but this slide reached insane speeds and flip riders constantly leaving them injured. The park ended up getting slammed with over 20 charges for safety violations and were found guilty on 6 of them. One man fractured his skull, another lady broke her back in multiple places, and the list of injuries go on and on. The park did eventually ban the slide and focused on upping their safety standards, but only after paying out a $280,000 lawsuit. Number 6. While we're still up north in Canada, this next entry takes us straight to Sylvan Lake in Alberta. Back in 1982, Wild Rapids Water Park opened to the public for business. As the largest water park on that side of Canada, it was a major attraction for folks young and old alike. I mean, people could just enjoy themselves by relaxing during the summer heat in any of their pools, multiple hot tubs, or even the 12 water slides the park had to offer. After 34 years of operation, the park was bought out by the town of Sylvan Lake. Shortly after, in 2016, it ceased operations and the town announced redevelopment to make it better than ever. Unfortunately, that redevelopment hasn't led to the park reopening, as all of the main slides and rides were put up for sale and the grounds were left completely abandoned. Our hope is that eventually some entrepreneur will happen across the listings for the equipment and rebuild a new and improved water park for the people of Alberta. All I know is that if anyone's looking to build a water park right now, they might want to wait for this whole quarantine thing to pass first though. Number 5. So I'm pretty sure it's obvious by now that it's hugely important for any ride to ensure the safety of those who ride it. With that in mind, it should come as no surprise that the Aquasphere featured at the Peninsula Aquatic Recreation Center was shut down. Known as the Park Facility, it was opened back in 2014, and the Aquasphere didn't actually open with it, as some employees who tested it received minor injuries from the ride. But this didn't stop them from later opening the ride to the public, where both back and head injuries began surfacing in droves by those who took the plunge. One report even mentioned a young boy who fell from his seat on the raft only to be battered by the ride until he was eventually shot out at the bottom. According to the witness, he was even unconscious for some time before returning back to reality. Following this and several other injuries, the slide was eventually taken out of commission and was intended to be remade in a way that prioritized safety above all else. Number 4. Now, we've had a number of accidents on this list, however this one didn't come from a slide being particularly hazardous to a person, rather an issue with the pipes inside the building which essentially froze solid and burst open. This made a gigantic mess, and the number of hazards caused by the ice actually prevented first responders from being able to help much during the situation. Now thankfully nobody was injured from the incident, and the ice did eventually melt, but even still it left the resort in need of a massive makeover before even having the chance of reopening. In my opinion, this one is really sad just because Fort Rapids was actually a really well-liked resort with an indoor water park. It was home to plenty of good memories for people on spring break or vacation, and nowadays it's like a ghost town with no plans of being reopened anytime soon. For number 3, if you're a Texas native, you may have heard about Water Wonderland near Midland. The park was opened back in 1980 and was every kid's dream to go to until it closed back in 2003. Before closing, however, it was filled with as many rides and slides as you could imagine. It also featured many other attractions, including food courts and mini golf courses, giving patrons tons of amazing options. However, there was an accident in 1996 where a bumper car, how do I put this lightly, exploded, and it broke the legs, feet, and toes of every driver in sight. Obviously, the park was in serious hot water with the public as they now faced a massive lawsuit. This incident, along with some other health and safety related issues, led to the park seeing a decrease in visitors until inevitably it closed up shop for good. For about 11 years after the park was left to rot, it ended up looking more like an area in a Fallout game than an actual water park. Luckily, a few years prior, an investor with Lazoya Construction purchased the property with the intention to reopen the park. And so yeah, although we may never be able to revisit the original, at least another park's being built that will forever continue its legacy. Number 2. Back in 2010, the water park Cedar Point opened up the highly anticipated Shoot the Rapids, a Western-themed log flume ride featuring 2 drops for those wanting a thrill. The ride itself is fairly simple. Think of a roller coaster that slows down when you get to the bottom, but then soaks you with water. Kind of like a homage to an older ride that shared the same name, which was closed in 1981. Even with it being deemed as safe and easy to operate, there was one recorded incident back in 2013 where one of the boats flipped backwards on one of the inclines. This injured everyone on board, one of which was taken to a local hospital but was later released. The ride continued operation for another 3 years before eventually being taken down. It suffered a lot from mechanical issues and low interest from attendees in general. Most people who went to Cedar Point had either rode the rapids once or never even at all. So I mean, with it hardly piquing interest from visitors, it was a no-brainer for the park to close down the ride. There were some talks about bringing the ride back in the future, but based on its previous history, I definitely won't be banking on that. Finally, taking our number 1 spot, we're going to be traveling across the globe to Vietnam to take a look at Hoi Tai Tien. Now, if you were literally to take a glance at it, you'd see that it's become somewhat of an abandoned wonderland with all the overgrowth around the park. Just a few years after opening, the park shut down with no real reason from the owner as to why. Speculators assume that it was linked to the park not drawing in as many customers as initially projected, but this was never really confirmed by the owners. Imagine a gigantic water park being opened and then randomly one day everyone just disappears. Although none of the rides and attractions are operable today, you could still technically visit here, but by the looks of it, you might want to avoid doing so considering it literally looks like the jungles from Jurassic Park. Even still, it's a very popular destination for Vietnam natives and tourists alike. I mean, being honest, it would be a ton of fun to explore, and if nothing else, the thrill from an abandoned water park would definitely be enough for me. There were some rumors about the park possibly reopening someday, but considering it's still getting a handful of guests, maybe they could just charge for tours instead of revamping the whole water park. I don't know, that doesn't make sense.